What happens when big design dreams meet even bigger construction challenges? From a traffic infrastructure project in the US to a world-class Olympic venue, some of the world's most ambitious projects faced overwhelming cost overruns, unexpected hurdles, and delays that reshaped their vision and delivery. These are the top 5 construction projects that broke the bank. First on the list, we have the Big Dig. What started as a plan to reroute traffic through Boston's crowded city streets soon turned into one of the most expensive public works projects in history. From the world's largest slurry wall to tunnels dug deeper than most had imagined possible, the project introduced new technologies that hadn't been attempted before. But with every new record came an even larger price tag. But what actually went so wrong? Boston University's Mega Project research program spent years dissecting the Big Dig, and it was discovered that the crippling cost was a result of the accumulation of a series of decisions made over time, alongside the staggering complexity of the task. In short, no one knew how to deal with such an ambitious project. Construction wasn't without its surprises. As work progressed, crews found themselves battling conditions no one had predicted. Uncharted utilities, archaeological treasures, and unstable ground all forced unexpected delays and changes. Even the discovery of Revolutionary War-era artifacts added time-consuming regulatory layers to the already complex job. And then, of course, there were the utilities. The Big Dig involved relocating a staggering 29 miles of essential infrastructure, gas lines, water pipes, and sewage systems, some of which dating back to more than a century old. But the kicker? No one knew where much of it was located, increasing the risk of damaging a critical utility and shutting down major parts of the city. The way the project was organized didn't help matters. The traditional design bid-build model separated the design and construction processes, leaving little room for collaboration between the engineers and builders, which created inefficiencies that delayed work and increased costs. The Big Dig was supposed to change the way mega projects were done. Instead, it became an example of how even with all the best programs, risk management, and planning, you still might not get it right. Originally projected to cost a modest $2.8 billion, it finished at a whopping $24 billion, almost 9 times its starting estimate. Next up is the Berlin-Brandenburg Airport in Germany. The grand vision for Berlin was to have a world-class airport that could handle long-haul flights and serve as a major hub for Europe. But getting there, that was a whole different story. It all started with big dreams in the aftermath of the Berlin Wall's fall in 1989. Leaders saw an opportunity to create a modern airport for the reunited city, something that would elevate Berlin's status as a global player. But as anyone who's followed the project knows, it didn't go as smoothly as anticipated. In the meantime, Berlin had 3 airports: Tegel, Tempelhof, and Schönefeld. Tempelhof is now a park, and Tegel, once meant to be temporary, stayed open far longer than anyone expected. Schönefeld, which had earned the title of worst airport in the world a few years back, eventually closed in 2020 with much of its infrastructure rolled into the new Berlin-Brandenburg setup. Construction officially began in 2006, and early projections for costs were, as always, based on the assumption that everything would go according to plan. But it quickly became clear that wasn't going to happen. The initial estimate of 2.83 billion euros turned out to be wildly off, and it wasn't long before technical problems began stacking up. Delays were constant, and the cost of fixing these issues kept rising. By the end of 2011, things had gotten worse. As inspectors came in to check out the fire safety systems and other features, it became obvious that the design was full of flaws. Escalators were too small, ceilings didn't fit, and ticket counters were off. What was supposed to be a grand opening for 2012 became a public relations disaster. German officials were forced to cancel the launch just weeks before the event, and the delays didn't stop there as the timeline kept shifting. The new opening was set for 2014, then 2016. But even in 2016, an audit revealed that less than half of the airport was usable. At that point, officials decided to stop giving out firm dates. The entire project was put on hold while they tried to figure out how to fix everything. By the time the airport was ready for passengers in 2020, costs had surged to 7.3 billion euros, more than double the original estimate. So after years of mishaps, it was finally time to open. The first passengers walked through the new terminal in late 2020, greeted by a sleek design that, while modern, didn't exactly scream state-of-the-art. There's the magic carpet installation, some walnut paneling, and plenty of polished check-in counters, but the place still felt like a work in progress. The elevators and escalators felt cramped, suggesting that not all the design issues were solved. Airport officials, however, insist the airport has been thoroughly tested, with all the latest technology in place. They claim it's now one of the safest airports in the world, largely due to all the testing that took place after the challenges of the past. At least it counts for something. Up next is the Sydney Opera House in Australia. Although it didn't cost as much money as the Brandenburg and is one of the world's most iconic landmarks, it didn't exactly follow the smoothest path to greatness. The story started in 1957 when the Australian government launched a competition to design a new national opera house to showcase the country's creativity and technical abilities. Danish architect Jørn Utzon won the contest with a stunning design that looked like sails or pedals, but his vision came with its own set of challenges. While he took home a prize of £5,000, he didn't have a fully fleshed out plan, and the design was far from finished when work began in 1959. During construction, the government kept changing the project requirements, like switching from 2 theaters to 4. The decision-making process was complicated and difficult, as Utzon shared control with engineers and subcontractors who had different ideas about how to run the show. With no clear plan, things quickly spun out of control. Budget problems were the first red flag. Without a finalized design, no one knew how much the budget would be, and as soon as construction started, the costs began piling up. As the team discovered issues with site surveys, the price tag kept rising. The project was split into 3 parts: the podium, the outer shells, and the interior. By the end of the first stage, the government stepped in, withholding payments until work was properly completed. By 1966, the Opera House was 4 years behind schedule, and Utzon, frustrated with the ongoing problems, walked away from the project, leaving his plans behind. A group of Australian engineers took over, finishing the second stage by 1967. However, because new designs were required for the next phase, the budget soared again, reaching $85 million. What was supposed to be a 4-year project with a budget of just $7 million turned into a 14-year ordeal that cost a whopping $102 million, more than 14 times the original estimate. But despite the headaches, the Opera House is now one of the busiest performance venues in the world, drawing over 10 million visitors annually. Coming in next is the legendary Channel Tunnel, a major rail link connecting the UK and France, stretching about 50 kilometers from Folkestone in England to Coquelles, near Calais in France. Opened in 1994, it's the only direct link between Great Britain and mainland Europe. The tunnel connects London with major cities like Paris, Brussels, and Amsterdam, offering a faster alternative to ferries and flights. When the idea was first proposed, it seemed straightforward, but the reality turned out to be much more complicated. The tunnel's budget, initially set at £4.9 billion, nearly doubled, reaching £9 billion by completion. The overruns were mainly due to engineering hurdles and changes in safety regulations that required alterations to the project mid-construction. The journey to building the Channel Tunnel was long and winding, starting as early as 1802 with the first idea of a tunnel under the English Channel. But it wasn't until the 1960s that talks between France and the UK gained traction. After years of planning and negotiations, the project officially began in the 1980s. By 1986, the UK and French governments signed the Treaty of Canterbury, paving the way for construction without any government-backed financial guarantees. Construction started off with challenges. The original budget and timeline quickly proved unrealistic, as delays, equipment issues, and the need to enhance safety features drove costs higher. The project was funded entirely by private capital, including loans from a group of banks that formed the Transmanche Link Consortium. The Channel Tunnel was also the subject of several proposals, but it was the Eurotunnel option, featuring 3 tunnels, 2 for trains and 1 for maintenance, that was chosen for its superior safety design. Despite the hurdles, the Channel Tunnel was a game changer in transportation, offering a vital link for freight and passengers. The Eurostar trains now connect cities like London and Paris, revolutionizing travel between the 2 countries. At the top of this list is the Sochi Winter Olympics. The 2014 Winter Olympics in Sochi are widely known as the priciest games in history. What started as a $12 billion plan turned into a staggering $51 billion, with most of the added cost coming from building infrastructure, security needs, and accusations of corruption. But where did this number come from? And is it really accurate? It turns out that the figure often cited comes from Dmitry Kozak, Russia's deputy prime minister who headed the Olympic Preparatory Committee. He estimated that the total cost of the Olympics in Sochi would be 1.5 trillion rubles, which is roughly $50 billion. However, there's a catch. The value of rubles dropped due to currency fluctuations, so by the time the games kicked off, that number was more like $43 billion. Adding to the complexity is the fact that Kozak's estimate was already a year old by the time the opening ceremonies took place. And with the cost of the games ballooning over the years, it's hard to believe that the 2013 estimate was truly accurate, especially when the numbers had been increasing rapidly for 6 years straight. The cost breakdown is another tricky part. COSAC claimed that $6.7 billion would go into Olympic facilities, and another $16.7 billion would be spent on upgrading the region's infrastructure. That adds up to about $23 billion, a far cry from the final number. The rest of the money was tied to private investments, with major sponsors, some of whom were close to President Vladimir Putin, contributing to hotels and other ventures around Sochi. Yet not everything in the budget was directly tied to the Olympics. For example, Sochi also built a Formula One racetrack, which cost an additional $350 million, but was not part of the Games themselves. And some of the spending would have likely happened even without the Olympics, like upgrades to roads and railways in the area. Of course, there were also whispers of corruption. Critics like Russian politicians Boris Nemtsov and Alexei Navalny claim that Putin's oligarchs inflated construction bills, skimming billions from government-backed loans. While it's hard to verify these allegations, some say that as much as $30 billion could have been siphoned off. Despite all these complications and uncertainties, the $51 billion figure stuck. It grabbed attention and pushed a narrative that the Sochi Olympics were meant to showcase Putin's power and Russia's growing strength on the world stage, and also snagged number 1 on our list of the top 5 construction projects that broke the bank. So, next time you think your project is delayed and over budget, just remember that it could be worse. Thanks for watching. Please leave your comments below and like and subscribe for more top 5 construction videos.